The concert was going perfectly until Elvis heard 3 words shouted from the balcony that made him stop the band, clear the stage, and do something that had never happened before in his career. It was Friday, December 12, 1976, at the Civic Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Elvis was performing to a crowd of 15,000 fans in what had become a routine stop on his winter tour. The show was going exactly as planned. The energy was good, Elvis was in decent voice, and the crowd was enthusiastic. Elvis had just finished Burning Love and was catching his breath, wiping his face with a towel while the band prepared for the next song. The arena was buzzing with excited chatter as fans anticipated what would come next. But in the upper balcony, in the cheapest seats in the house, something was about to happen that would transform this ordinary concert into an extraordinary moment of healing and redemption. As Elvis prepared to introduce his next song, a voice suddenly cut through the noise of the crowd. It was a woman's voice, strong and clear, shouting from somewhere high up in the balcony. "Elvis, I forgive you." The arena immediately quieted as people tried to locate where the voice had come from. Elvis froze, the microphone halfway to his lips, his face going pale. Those 3 words, "I forgive you," hit Elvis like a physical blow. His hand started shaking, and he nearly dropped the microphone. "Who said that?" Elvis asked, his voice barely audible. "Who just said that?" The crowd murmured in confusion. Elvis never stopped shows like this. Something was clearly wrong. "I forgive you, Elvis," the voice called out again, louder this time. "It wasn't your fault." Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, squinting up into the bright lights that made it nearly impossible to see the upper balcony clearly. "Please," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice trembling. "Whoever just said that, I need to see you. I need to know who you are." The band members looked at each other in confusion. Elvis' security team immediately went on alert, unsure if this was some kind of threat or disruption. "Charlie," Elvis said to his guitarist, "stop the show. Turn on the house lights. All of them." This was unprecedented. Elvis had never stopped a concert like this before. As the house lights came up, illuminating the entire arena, Elvis shaded his eyes and stared up at the upper balcony, section 314, where a woman was standing with tears streaming down her face. "Come down here," Elvis said, his voice breaking. "Please, ma'am, I need you to come down here, right now." Her name was Catherine Pierce, and she was 52 years old. She had driven 8 hours from Columbus, Ohio, to be at this concert, and section 314 was all she could afford on her nurse's salary. Catherine had never intended to shout those words. For 19 years she had carried a secret pain related to Elvis Presley, a pain so deep that even her own family didn't fully understand it. But something about seeing Elvis on that stage, looking older and more vulnerable than she remembered, had broken through her carefully maintained composure. As security escorted Catherine down from the balcony, the entire arena watched in confused silence. Elvis stood on stage, visibly shaking, tears already forming in his eyes. When Catherine finally reached the floor level and security began leading her toward the stage, Elvis did something that shocked everyone. He walked off the stage completely, down the steps, and met her halfway up the aisle. Elvis and Catherine stood face to face in the middle of the arena aisle, with 15,000 people watching and waiting. "Do I know you?" Elvis asked gently, studying her face. Catherine nodded, barely able to speak. "August 16th, 1957. Methodist Hospital in Memphis. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." Elvis's face went from confused to horrified as the memory clearly hit him. His legs buckled slightly, and his security had to steady him. "Oh God," Elvis whispered. "Oh my God, you're the nurse." Catherine's voice was shaking as she began to tell her story, but Elvis's microphone picked up enough for the crowd to hear pieces of it. "I was a student nurse at Methodist Hospital in 1957, Catherine said. "I was 23 years old, and I was assigned to the maternity ward the day your mother, Gladys, was brought in." The crowd gasped audibly. Everyone knew how much Elvis had loved his mother, who had died in 1958. "Your mother had been feeling ill," Catherine continued, "and you brought her to the hospital. You were so young, so famous, but so scared. I'd never seen someone so terrified of losing their mother." Elvis was crying openly now, right there in the middle of the aisle. "The doctor told you that your mother needed to stay overnight for observation," Catherine said. "You didn't want to leave her, but you had commitments, recording sessions, appearances. The doctor assured you she'd be fine." "That night," Catherine continued, her own tears flowing, "I was doing my rounds around 2 a.m. I checked on your mother, and something wasn't right. Her breathing was labored. Her color was off. I immediately called for the attending physician." Catherine paused, gathering strength to continue. "But the doctor on duty that night was drunk. He'd been drinking in his office, and when I called him, he told me I was overreacting. He said Mrs. Presley just needed rest, and that I was being hysterical because she was Elvis Presley's mother." The arena was dead silent. Now, this was a story that had never been told publicly. "I didn't know what to do," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I was just a student nurse. I had no authority. So I followed orders and let your mother sleep. But I stayed in her room all night, monitoring her. At 6 a.m., your mother's condition suddenly worsens," Catherine said. "I called for help immediately, but by the time the sober doctors arrived, she'd had a heart attack. They stabilized her that morning, but the damage was done. A year later, when she died, I always believed it started with that night." Elvis was sobbing now, and so was Catherine. "For 19 years, Catherine continued, I've carried the guilt that I didn't do more, that I didn't call you directly, didn't override the drunk doctor, didn't save your mother when I had the chance." She looked directly into Elvis's eyes. "But I've also carried guilt about something else. 3 months after that night, I wrote you a letter. I told you what happened, that the hospital had covered it up, that a drunk doctor had ignored my concerns about your mother." Elvis looked shocked. "I never received any letter." "I know," Catherine said. "Your handlers intercepted it. They thought I was trying to cause trouble or get money. They sent me a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I ever contacted you again. So I stayed silent," Catherine said. "And I watched you for 19 years, carrying the guilt of your mother's death, blaming yourself for not being there, for choosing your career over staying with her." She took a deep breath. "But Elvis, it wasn't your fault. The doctor assured you she'd be fine. You had no reason not to believe him. And I want you to know, I've talked to cardiologists over the years, and they all say the same thing. Your mother's heart condition was genetic and severe. Even if everything had been handled perfectly that night, she probably wouldn't have survived much longer." Elvis collapsed to his knees right there in the aisle, his body shaking with sobs that echoed through the arena's sound system. Catherine knelt down beside Elvis, and for a moment, these two people who had carried the same guilt for 19 years simply held each other and cried. "I forgive you for not being there," Catherine said. And I need you to forgive me for not doing more." Elvis looked at her through his tears. "There's nothing to forgive. You were a student nurse standing up to a doctor. You did everything you could. My mama's death wasn't your fault any more than it was mine." The arena erupted in emotional applause, but Elvis and Catherine barely noticed. They were locked in their own moment of healing. Elvis helped Catherine to her feet and led her back toward the stage. When they reached the stairs, Elvis turned to address the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "for 19 years I've blamed myself for my mother's death. For 19 years I've carried a guilt that's eaten me alive and contributed to every bad decision I've made." He gestured to Catherine. "This woman just gave me a gift I never thought I'd receive. The truth is that sometimes bad things happen, not because we didn't do enough, but because life is fragile and hearts give out, and doctors make terrible mistakes." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "How many of you are carrying guilt for something that wasn't really your fault?" Elvis asked. Hands slowly began to rise throughout the arena. Dozens, then hundreds of people raised their hands. "Catherine," Elvis said, turning to her, "would you stay on stage with me while I sing something?" Catherine nodded, overwhelmed. Elvis led her to a chair at the side of the stage and then walked to the microphone. "I'm going to sing How Great Thou Art," he announced. "But I'm not singing it as entertainment. I'm singing it as a prayer of gratitude for the truth, and as a prayer for everyone here who needs to let go of guilt that doesn't belong to them." What happened next became one of the most powerful performances of Elvis's entire career. He sang How Great Thou Art with a raw emotion that he'd never displayed before. His voice cracked with genuine feeling, and every note carried the weight of 19 years of grief being transformed into healing. As Elvis sang, something remarkable happened throughout the arena. People began standing, not in celebration, but in solidarity. They stood for their own guilt, their own losses, their own need for forgiveness. And many of them were crying, experiencing their own moments of release. After the song ended, Elvis did something else unprecedented. He invited Catherine to speak into the microphone and tell her full story to the audience. Catherine talked about the drunk doctor, about the hospital's cover-up, about the legal threats she'd received for trying to tell the truth. She talked about the career in nursing she'd almost quit because of the guilt, and how she'd spent 19 years working extra shifts and volunteering with hospice patients to try to atone for what she believed was her failure. "But tonight," Catherine said, "Elvis helped me see that I didn't fail. I did what I could with the authority I had, and sometimes that has to be enough." The response from the audience was overwhelming. People stood and applauded for a full 5 minutes. Several nurses in the audience came forward to hug Catherine and share their own stories of impossible situations in healthcare. Elvis finished the concert that night, but something fundamental had changed in him. Friends and band members later said that December 12, 1976, was a turning point. "Elvis let go of something that night," said one of his backup singers. He'd been carrying his mother's death like a backpack full of rocks for almost 20 years. After meeting Catherine, you could see the weight lift off his shoulders. Elvis kept in touch with Catherine after that night. He paid for her to go back to school to become a nurse practitioner, and he funded a scholarship in her name at Methodist Hospital for student nurses who showed exceptional patient advocacy. The story that Catherine told on stage that night had consequences. Within weeks, Investigative journalists had uncovered the 1957 cover-up at Methodist Hospital. The drunk doctor, long since retired, was exposed. The hospital administration that had threatened Catherine faced public backlash. But more importantly, the story led to changes in how hospitals handled concerns raised by nurses, particularly student nurses. Catherine's courage in finally telling the truth helped create better patient advocacy protocols that are still in use today. 6 months after that concert, Catherine received a letter from Elvis. In it, he thanked her not just for telling him the truth about his mother's death, but for showing him that healing was possible, even after decades of pain. "You gave me back part of my life," Elvis wrote. "The part that was frozen in 1958, trapped in guilt and grief. Because of you I can remember my mama with joy instead of just pain. Because of you I can forgive myself. And because of you I learned that it's never too late for truth to set us free." Catherine Pierce's 3 words, "I forgive you," shouted from a balcony in Pittsburgh, created ripples that extended far beyond that one concert. The story inspired thousands of people to seek closure for their own unresolved guilt. Support groups formed around the country for people carrying survivors' guilt. Hospitals implemented better protocols for nurses to advocate for patients. And Elvis himself began talking more openly about grief and healing in his concerts. The recording of that night's concert became one of Elvis's most treasured performances, not because of technical perfection, but because of raw emotional honesty. Catherine Pierce went to that concert hoping to just see Elvis perform from the cheap seats. She never intended to shout those 3 words. But something about seeing Elvis on that stage, seeing him older, more vulnerable, clearly still carrying pain, broke through her own carefully maintained walls. Elvis thought he was just performing another show on another tour. Instead, he received the gift of truth that had been kept from him for 19 years, and with it, the permission to finally stop blaming himself. The concert was going perfectly until Catherine's voice rang out from the balcony. But perfect isn't always what we need. Sometimes we need disruption. Sometimes we need truth. Sometimes we need 3 words shouted from the cheap seats to crack open wounds that have festered for too long. Because healing doesn't always come from expected places or in comfortable packages. Sometimes it comes from a balcony in Pittsburgh, from a nurse who carried guilt she didn't deserve, speaking to a man who carried guilt he didn't earn. And sometimes the most powerful thing we can say to someone is simply, "I forgive you. It wasn't your fault." If this incredible story of guilt, truth, and redemption moved you, make sure to subscribe and share this video. Let us know in the comments if you've ever finally received the truth you needed to heal, or if you've been carrying guilt that doesn't belong to you. Sometimes the most powerful gift we can give someone is the truth, even if it takes 19 years to deliver it.